Last time on CARMO 3.
When we come together, but something is wrong. It doesn't totally make sense.
Hey, Deconverted Man, Karen S. here. As we go into point 5 of Matt Slick's tag, you can see we've now broken into 2 steps, taking separate paths. The right side where the laws of logic are abstractions and are representative of reality, and the other side where Matt Slick tries to separate them as abstractions and claim they are independent of reality in order to continue along a tortuous route to his conclusion that these are ultimately concepts reflected of the mind of his God. So far, it seems he has only tried to justify the classical laws of logic, and as Deconverted Man has pointed out, he hasn't done a very good job. He also tries to make a poor case that the laws of logic are absolutes without answering the critical question of why isn't there now at least a consensus when it appears only Christian apologetic websites have made this determination. Anyway, on to point 5 of Deconverted Man and Karen S.'s analysis of the CARM tag. Number 5. The laws of logic are not dependent on the material world. 5.1. The laws of logic are not found in atoms, motion, heat, under rocks, etc. Number 5.2. The laws of logic cannot be photographed, frozen, weighed, or measured. Number 5.3. The laws of logic are not the product of the physical universe, since that would mean they were contingent on atoms, motion, heat, etc., and that their nature was dependent on physical existence.
Oh no, not that. Anything but that. We must pretend that that's not the way it is. Why, if this thing is like this, then that means that, and that equals bad thing. So we don't want that, so we're just gonna pretend like that's not how it is. Ha ha ha! Nobody will notice the appeal to consequence. Laws, laws, laws.
Number 5.3.1. If their nature were dependent upon physical existence, they would cease to exist when the physical universe ceases to exist.
And if Jesus didn't drive a Honda, then the Bible can't be taken to be inerrant, and that's bad for people that want to take the Bible as being inerrant. Therefore, Jesus must have drove a Honda, but he didn't talk about it. Ha 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 ha.
Number 5.3.2. If they were the properties of the universe, then they could be measured the same way. Heat, motion, mass, etc. are measured. Since they cannot be measured, they are not properties of the universe.
Measured in what way, though? Because, like, we could have somebody brain be scanned as they think about anything except for logic, and then they could think about logic, and then pieces of their brain, would light up, and so we're measuring it via the thing that we're measuring them of, whatever you want to call that machine. I'm no neurosurgeon, so I don't know what it's called. I'm going to call it a brain measuring thing. That's totally not its name. Somebody correct me in the comment section. Anyways, so we did measure it. So that blows all this out of the water. What Matt wants to do is say that this is an abstract concept, like the letter A or the number 1. The letter A, or any letter at all, and any number at all, does not exist out here with the rest of us. It exists only in our brain. It is a concept. Now, what he wants to do is say, well, you can't measure it, you can't weigh it, and all this stuff, which, again, I would say, well, you can measure it if you were scanning that person's brain and having them think of those things, that is a way to measure it. But nonetheless, We're just going to pretend that that's not a thing that we could do and say, all right, yeah, sure. So the numbers and letters are all things that are transcendent along with logic. Why not use those for your argument? Why not go after letters or numbers? Well, I'll tell you why. Because you can't automatically win your debate if you went that way. You see, by using logic, you can sit back smugly and put your arms behind your head as you say, haha, I won. And the other person, like, we haven't even begun to talk. Well, see, if you debate me, I win. Because by using logic, which you have to do in the debate, you're proving that God exists. Because logic proves God exists. And if you don't use logic, then I still win. See? Ha 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 ha. But it's not how it works because we could measure these things. So he's wrong even on that level. But I guess what he means by measure is something different than what I would think. Maybe like means like a ruler, like we can't like measure it with a ruler or something. I don't know. Slick is just oh man. Back to Karen.
5.4. But if the universe did not exist, the laws of logic are still true.
Pulling the idea that logic is part of God from the Bible requires extraordinary theological tap dancing. At best, you can say God is the God of knowledge or things like this, but I don't think that there's a verse that you could point to and say, see, it says God equal logic or God is necessary for logic to exist or something like that. You have to add that in using theology that is not supported by Scripture, which, scripturally speaking, makes you a false prophet. So, if we're following just the Bible and setting aside logic as clearly that's been done long before by Matt Slick, we can't even make a theological case on this because it's not supported by any scripture without doing some special tap dances and interpreting and reinterpreting the scripture to say something that it doesn't say. So even from a theological perspective, he's on weak ground. And setting aside theology because who cares about theology? How would you ever know that statement is true? If the universe didn't exist, then nothing would exist except for, I suppose, your God. But then how do you know that your God is the source or attributes or whatever of logic when that's not found in the Bible? There's no way to put those two together other than to just say, well, it makes sense or because or appeal to consequence. This special knowledge that Matt Slick has here is bad on a logical level, it's bad on a theological level, it's just bad. And by bad, I mean completely and utterly wrong. So, that's a thing.
So, according to Slick, logical absolutes cannot arise from the natural realm. Obviously, we cannot test these assertions. We can't make the universe blink momentarily out of existence to see if the law of identity persists. But there's a bigger problem. The suggestion that the universe might cease to exist is itself unintelligible without appealing to the law of identity. Our embrace of logical absolutes is a prerequisite to any thought experiment concerning the existence of the universe. It is therefore not only impossible to test Slick's assertion practically, we also can't test the conjecture imaginatively. His thought experiment consequently tells us nothing about the universe or the nature of logical absolutes, or such logical absolutes. What it tells us is that our imagination is tightly constrained by our mental programming. Let me also propose that we cannot even conceive of the absence of the cosmos, by which I mean our universe and any other universe that may exist. Sure, we can speak of the cosmos not existing. Our grammar is sufficient to build sentences that refer to the absence of the cosmos, but we cannot actually conceive it. When we try, we end up thinking of the cosmos from some different camera angle or with the subatomic particles of the cosmos shuffled about. As Immanuel Kant observed, we can never imagine or make a representation to ourselves of the non existence of space, nor can we think of empty space. Stephen Hawking flatly states that there is no such thing as empty space. 5.4.1 For example, if the universe did not exist, it would still be true that something cannot bring itself into existence, and that if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. The condition of the universe does not affect these truths. 5.4.2 For example, if the universe did not exist, it would still be true that something cannot be itself and not itself at the same time. 5.4.3 Therefore, the laws of logic are not dependent on the material world. Back to you, Deconverted Man.
Now, Deconverted Man, remember when you did that debate about a year ago with Matt Slick? And don't you recall how you used the Socratic method extremely well? You asked him questions, and you got him tripped up in his own theology, in his own apologetic, because it showed how vapid and obtuse it was. Don't you remember? You did a great job, and I think you could even use that in our videos. Oh geez, what happened?
I'm not sure what just happened there, Karen. You said back to me, and then this film came in, and then you said the thing about it wasn't a debate; it was a talk. Everyone keeps calling it a debate. It was a discussion. I don't know that I did that well, but thank you for the kind words. Speaking of that, in that talk I had with Slick a year or some odd ago, I asked him for empirical evidence to repeatable test or logically coherent argument. And instead of giving me any of those, he said that asking for those or demanding those was subjective, and that was pretty much the furthest I could go with that. Of course, this is after he said that he lacked belief in the age of the earth, which is complete and utter nonsense. And then, of course, and then towards the end, he accused me of being inconsistent, which I consistently agreed with, showing that I'm not inconsistent, because if I was inconsistent, then I wouldn't keep agreeing with him that I was being inconsistent. But I asked him, what do I do to get out of this? Because I don't have a system. Let's say I just drop all my system. Now what? And the only honest answer that I think he gave during that discussion was become a Christian. To him, in his brain, in his worldview, that's the only way to make sense of anything, is to be a Christian. But how in the world does somebody who is not a Christian accept the ideas of Christianity unless they become a Christian? If you can't understand something because you're not a Christian, then how would you ever know that being a Christian is the way to understand it? How would you ever be able to trust a system that you have to be first part of that system before you can comprehend that you needed to be part of that system? It really doesn't make any sense at all. I agree that reality is real no matter what. I do not agree and cannot agree with the idea that the laws of logic exist independent of the universe, because the laws of logic are based completely upon our understanding, limited or flawed as it may be, of the universe. If we had a different universe, we'd have different logic to fit that. If we stop having a universe, then there are no entities to think about a universe at all, except for God, right? But if God exists apart from the universe, then what use does the laws of logic have for this entity? The only thing that exists is God, nothing else. So, why does it need the law of identity? Why does it need the law of non contradiction? Why does it need the law of excluded middle? And to just say, well, these are attributes of it, why does it need attributes? Why does it need anything at all? Why would it have anything at all? Why would it have all of these things? Why would it need or have a nature at all? And in fact, isn't the very concept of God having a nature something that's impossible, since nature doesn't exist? God is supernatural, beyond comprehension of us mere humans. And when I asked like why God wouldn't do something miraculous, and then said that either God doesn't care or he doesn't have the power to do it, and Slick added in, or God's not going to stoop down to your level. In other words, God is never going to do anything that would prove itself to me and or the rest of humanity, because God's just so far above us that he's not going to do what we want him to do, even though in Christian mythos, God will do what you ask if you ask sincerely with at least two people in his name, even though if they do that, it still won't happen, and that must be because it wasn't God's will. So you have to pray for something that's totally within God's will, which negates the whole idea that you can pray for anything. You can only pray for things that are any. So what's the point of prayer then? God is put into such terms that it is identical with nature. Logic is dependent upon nature. So I can understand to some extent Matt Slick's confusion that logic is dependent upon God, when in fact the truth of the matter is logic is dependent upon reality. And it is God who is dependent upon our brains and our ability to imagine things beyond reality. Logic, too, is dependent upon our brains and our ability to perceive reality. But we can show how logic functions, we can describe how logic functions, and we can understand how logic functions. We can do none of those things with Matt Slick's concept of God, or as far as I'm aware, any other concept of God. What's God made out of? How does God work? How does God have power? How does God influence its power over nothingness to make that nothingness into something? How does God manipulate that something when itself is beyond and or above that something? How does God think without a brain to do so with? These are questions that theology simply cannot ever answer. Logic can answer how it works. Theology can't even begin to hope to answer how God works. Next time on Carm Harm Part Zebra, we'll be talking more about whatever it is that Matt Slick has for us to look at and talk about. Until then, unless and until we have lobster ears, we must continue to be Karen S. Wait, what?